Welcome back to Story Time with Kat, where we tell the stories that turn this poor little rich girl into a firebird rising. Today, we have a very special guest, Richard Gargano. He worked with my father very, very early on when he first left General Motors. He has some incredible stories to tell and some amazing history that I've never heard before. So, with that, I'm going to stop talking because he's the one you want to hear from. And Richard, hello. Thank you for
Hi,
joining us today.
thank you.
Could you please introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us a little bit about how you met my dad and that story?
My name is Richard Gargano. I'm 84 years old. I've been in the business a long time. I worked for John for almost 3.5 years in the beginning, before there was a car, when we were doing work for Allstate Insurance Company. Now, how this all came about was John's attorney owned a building at 100 Long Lake Road, and he gave John the third floor, all the offices on the third floor. And I think his offices were on the second floor. I worked for New Center Studio. I started with New Center Studio in 1970. They were in the Detroit Bank and Trust building in downtown Detroit. My boss, Art Greenwald, we were on the 27th floor. He had the only office in Detroit that on a clear day, he could see Cleveland and Fort Erie. All he had to do was move his chair around. Well, Darcy McManus, McManus, John, and Adams Advertising Agency was at Long Lake Road in Woodward. They were the only agency that had two car accounts, Cadillac and Pontiac. And they're still, to this day, the only agency that ever had two car accounts. They built a huge building that was 4 stories with escalators in it, elevators in it, and it was a state-of-the-art back then. So their old building was for lease. And my boss, Art Greenwald, found out about it. And the rent that we were paying in the downtown Detroit was astronomical. So he worked out a deal to take over the old Darcy building. And we moved to Long Lake and Woodward. 177 artists, illustrators, designers, salesmen, the largest studio in the world. So I was in the studio one day talking with the receptionist, which I told you, Kat, everybody wanted to talk with her. She was, on a scale of 1 to 10, she was a 12. And I happened to be down there one day talking with her, and this flamboyant gentleman walked in, tall, handsome, with a brown paper bag like you'd get at Kroger. And he came up the stairs to the lobby. And he said, I understand you have a studio. And the receptionist said, he can help you with that. He knows all about it. So I said, yes, we do. It's in Birmingham, Michigan. He said, well, I have a bunch of film here that I need proof prints as quickly as I can get them. And I kept looking at him, and he looked so familiar. And then I realized, my God, it's John DeLorean. And I said, listen, I will get these proof prints made for you. I will deliver them to you as soon as they're done. So I did. I got everything proofed. Some were big 16 by 20 proofs. Some were 11 by 14. Some were 8 by 10. And I packaged everything up, and I took it to his office at 100 Long Lake Road, which was just walking distance from where I was, and gave him everything. And that's when we met, really, for the first time. And it's just John and I in his office. And he's asking me a lot of questions about, what I've done with my career. I said, well, my brother and I owned a studio for about 15 years where we did all the technical work for Ford and Lincoln Mercury. That consisted of all the owner's manuals, maintenance manuals, service bulletins, anything that was in the technical end of the business, we did for 15 years. We parted ways around 1970, and that's when I went to work for New Center Studio. So he kept asking me about my past, and I told him we had our own print shop within our studio, so we could print things fast for Ford and Lincoln Mercury, because it took 3 days to get a printer. They had to go to purchasing, and then purchasing had to bring in 3 bids. And by the time all that was done, it was 3 or 4 days, and they needed printing done fast for these service bulletins and technical work. So we started a print shop, printed all their stuff, and charged them as it was artwork. But nobody knew, So it went on for years like that. And John's taking all this in. And finally, after about an hour and a half in his office, after delivering the proof prints, he said to me, he says, I could use somebody like you. He said, would you consider leaving New Center Studio and coming to work for me? And I said, well, can I think about it a little bit? So I went back to New Center Studio, closed the door in my office, put my feet on the desk, and I just started thinking, my God, work for John DeLorean. Probably the greatest intellect in the automobile business in the history of automobiles. I said, what is there to think about? So I went back. I took him, let me in. He said, I accept. And that's when I went to work for John. And of course, all my printing background and knowing presses and knowing bindery and knowing everything was a real asset to John, because John had a lot of things that needed to be printed overnight, bound, and ready to take to clients. And Allstate happened to be one of them. So we were working on the restraint system for the automobile industry for the next 10 years. What would happen in a 5-mile-an-hour crash, 10-mile-an-hour crash, 15-mile-an-hour crash? And who better to do that than John? Because John designed a lot of the cars, knew everything what was going on with all of the cars. Didn't matter what car company it was. John knew, he just knew. And that's why they hired John.
So,
and then, pardon?
One of the interesting things you told me, though, was that all of this started while he was still at General Motors.
When you and I looked at the timelines,
yeah,
of when I was doing work for John, John was still working for GM.
Yes.
But he had offices at 100 Long Lake Road, and he had the JZD Corporation. And that was the logo I sent you that I designed for him. And that was the first business card for the John DeLorean Corporation, which did work for Allstate, tried to do work for Rolls-Royce, and did a lot of consulting work for different organizations. There was a company called Allied, something to do with engines and drivetrains and things. And John did some consulting for them also. And we printed up some documents for them and bound some books and things for them. And all of that was done in my garage.
Yeah, John, in your personal print studio.
In my personal print studio, John bought a multilith printer. He bought a velo buying machine, and he bought a spiral buying machine. And all of that was in my garage. And I could take something from John at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Take it to the typesetters, have all the types set, have it in my hands by 5 o'clock, make a plate in the garage, put it on the press, print it, and have it in his hands at 8 o'clock that night, ready for him to take in the morning wherever he was going.
Wow.
And that's how fast we worked.
What was really interesting about the timeline, that when we started talking, I had a suspicion. When you first told me that he started working with you in 1972, that timeline matches up with when he was promoted. So I asked you what month, and you had said October. And that is the exact time he was promoted to the vice president of car and truck operations for North America. And I like to say that that's the type of position where you get to see the secret sauce, the things that aren't really being made available to everyone. And what's really interesting about this particular situation is he bought you a print studio. So yeah, he'd have it quick, but also you didn't have to take this anywhere else. It was all done in-house.
And nobody knew about it.
And the study he was doing was the study that was later used to prove that the automotive industry was lying about how much it cost to put full passive restraints in cars. So it appears that he was promoted, learned the truth about what was going on, and then went behind everybody's back to prove they were lying. And
exactly.
Now, and he risked everything. I mean, he literally, back then, I've been led to believe they would have you killed for something like that. But I mean, so
absolutely,
that's just.
And of course, he, when the writers would come on Saturday, when he was writing on a clear day, you can see General Motors. Some of that was in the book.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in that book that they're really.
There was things that went in the book that John and I were doing a few years before, in the garage.
Yeah,
and no, the only people that knew it were John and I. And then later, when he hired Colleen O'Neill, she was involved in it also. And the story about John and an Allstate insurance company is one of the great automotive stories of all time. What his last presentation to Allstate, when he brought the final leather-bound books with everything that was happening, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and left everything with them. The head of Sears and Roebuck, the head of Allstate Insurance Company, and their top legal advisor all were in a conference room with John before he left to fly back to Pontiac. And they offered him, they said, John, this is what we want to do. We want to build a 5-passenger world car. We want to sell it through Sears and Roebuck. We want to put Allstate Insurance Company on every car. And we want you to design it and build it. And John, and he said, we're going to give you a blank check, whatever you need. And John was so appreciative and said, listen, this is the wonderful opportunity, but I want my own car company. And I want my name on the brick and mortar. And he turned him down. Now, when John was at the tech center and working for Chevrolet and Pontiac at the tech center, I sent you the pictures, Kat, of the cars that were parked. John's office was on a corner, and he could look out the window this way, and he could look out the window this way. And some of the cars were parked here, and some were parked here. And all he had to do was do this with his chair, and he could see them all. And he kept looking at those cars for months, years. And that's when he was formulating, I know, in his mind, what he was going to do with the DMZ. That's when it was born. He was sitting in the office looking at those stainless steel sports cars sitting on the street.
So the cars that you're talking about, just so everybody else knows, are the Aerovet and the Reynolds aluminum vet that were both commissioned by my dad when he was the head of Chevrolet.
Yep.
So he was basically obsessed with these cars, which is no surprise to me, because if you look at those cars, the interior of both of those cars looks identical to the first prototype. So that's actually quite fascinating. And I think he really wanted to give Zora his dream, and GM was going to make Zora retire. So my dad was in a mad rush to try and get him to have the ability to make his mid-engine Corvette. And I think when it didn't happen, when he was at Chevrolet, I think that's part of the reason why he tried to buy the engineering off of GM, so that he could make the car that they had worked on and lusted after for so long.
That's correct.
So the Aerovet and the Reynolds aluminum Corvette are actually the birth of the DeLorean.
And John used to drive those cars to and from the tech center.
Yeah, you told me that, and he would just I love that though, because I love those cars. Those are pretty wild.
He used to tell me stories. He said, when we'd rev those cars up, he said the sound, he said, was just incredible. He said my mechanics would come out, and tune them up and take them in the garage and bring them back. And when they were outside my window, they'd gun them, and I could hear through the window.
Oh, that's amazing.
And he would tell stories like that a lot about. But I could just read what he was saying to me, and I knew that he was formulating all that when he was looking at those cars when he was at the tech center. And this is way, way before. This is years before.
And you told me that he had a sketch pad, which I showed you. I have the same thing in my office, set up in his office, and he had actually sketched what became the red renderings that you took to have the marker drawings.
Right. The Dale Dalton renderings.
What's really interesting about those is he did those, I guess, in the early 70s. And later, a BMW was made that looked identical to those drawings, but his drawings predated that car by a good 5 years, I think, something like that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Which is wild. Right. So and somebody said, well, how could that happen? I said, I know how that can happen because I just watched that happen with my car in Cadillac. Angel designed this one car, and it was wildly popular. It's the styling design. I mean, you use the same things. That's why so many cars in the 80s all kind of look the same, which is a good segue to Giugiaro coming along and the first prototype, which has a distinctly different look than the car that was eventually made. But part of that, too, has to do with the re-engineering of it, because the first car was intended to have, and this is wild, a Rolls-Royce rotary engine. Which I guess did Rolls-Royce make the Wankel at the time?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah. So he has a whole proposal in the book that you sent me to partner with Rolls-Royce and to actually make a more affordable luxury sedan.
Exactly. Yep.
Mark is where the D24 actually comes from. It way predates the DMC-12. Like way predates the DMC-12. And so this was the 4-seater luxury sedan that would have been made with Rolls-Royce. And then he had the early design is on the back of the CTC packet. So could you tell me a little bit about the early design that I think it's the one you sent me the picture of, right? The print, the beautiful. Yeah. that
Right.
you said to find the original drawing because it's just breathtaking?
Oh, the original drawing was on John's wall for, a year and a half, in his office. It
When
was
did
it,
that
it was in a gorgeous. In fact, I took it to Mrs. Skolnick, and she framed it and put the mat on it. And when I brought it back, John just said, "Oh my God, that's so beautiful." He said, "It's going right there," And we had to get up. I had to go find a hook that would take 20 pounds, because it was plaster walls. And
Yeah.
finally I got something that we could hang it on, because the first one we hung it, it didn't work. And, I mean, I remember I used to have Mrs. Skolnick do stuff for me. She made albums, photography albums, and did framing and things. And she was in Oak Park, and I took everything to her, and she made this gorgeous. And it hung in John's office. I just wish we knew where that was,
Yeah, I do too.
because it was just absolutely gorgeous.
I can tell by just looking at the draw. I mean, because I'm an artist too, so you can see all the marks. It is stunning, absolutely stunning.
Yeah,
Um,
it is really.
but when was that commissioned? When was that made? That was made long before the car was made, because this was
Oh
before you
yeah,
did the
it was.
prototype.
It was the first rendering concept when he really got. The first magic marker ones were the ones I sent you, the three
Yeah.
stages. Now you could tell from the drawings that he made on his big sketch pads, and that I took to Dale Dalton, and Dale Dalton pumped them up with magic marker, and I brought him back to John. But you could see in those drawings that he was leaning towards the car that was going to have the ERM process
Yeah.
of the stainless steel laminated to the plastic. And you could see that in the way he sketched. He knew that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And he hadn't bought the patents yet.
So
he had a deal with Owens Corning, he had a deal with Marco Chemical, and he had a deal with Shell Oil. And when he finally got all three of them to agree, and he bought out, that's when it all came together, and that's when the ERM process was born.
So I have a really interesting question for you. The rendering that you gave me says DMC on the front of the car. The original car prototype that I saw, I've seen two different ones. One said DSV and one said JZD. So why did the original rendering have DMC, but then it was still JZD and all this other stuff when the prototype was actually made? Do you know anything about that?
It was the group in Dearborn that built the first prototype.
Which was Cars and Concepts, right?
Well, it was a division of Cars and Concepts. It was people that left Cars and Concept and started this other company that built the prototype.
Okay. So
but some of the management at this company in Dearborn was previously worked for Cars and Concepts.
So that wasn't Metal Specialists, or was that
Metal Specialist was one of the companies.
Okay.
And then there was another company.
Visioneering.
There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
So there was three, and metal specialists are the ones who did the stamping of the 500 panels that
Right.
You said probably went to the Cars and Concepts guys, because that didn't go to Visioneering.
Correct.
So for everybody who's been following the 500 car debacle, this is what happened to the 500 panels that were actually stamped at Metal Specialists. They went to the original prototyper, which wasn't Visioneering. Visioneering made this actually, I don't know. What's the difference between Proto 1 and Proto 2? Was Proto 1 made by Visioneering, Mark?
I don't think Proto 1 was built by Bill Collins, I thought.
See, Bill Collins worked with Visioneering to build the prototype, but there was another prototype that wasn't built at Visioneering. So, and
that was the prototype that had his initials on it.
Okay, so there you go. Okay, so
the first prototype built had John Z. DeLorean.
Okay, so that car is missing. That car, so Proto 1 isn't Proto 1. Proto 1 is Proto 2.
Well, I think Proto 1 was just a shell.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing, right? So this makes sense to me in the development of the car. That's what we're doing right now. We're making the
I don't think Bill Collins was involved in Prototype 1.
No, and that was basically a rolling chassis.
He was still at Pontiac when Prototype 1 was done.
And the first one with JZD on it, that was essentially a rolling chassis, right? It didn't function as a car. Okay, so Proto 1 was
a rolling chassis.
Okay, correct. So Proto 1 is the
and they
first
put his initials
prototype.
on it.
Okay, cool.
So for the purpose, I assume you're editing things I say out, so I'm trying to be careful when I speak, but be careful with the nomenclature you use, because within the community, Proto 1 is the first drivable car that's currently at the Hershey Museum. So if you're talking about I think they call that the wooden mock-up is the
no,
one with
was
the
it?
JZD
No. Yeah, so it wasn't a wooden mock-up. It was actually a rolling chassis. So you had the, so I think actually the rolling chassis I think the JZD one would have been the wooden mock-up, and then the rolling chassis would have actually been the DSV one. I think that's what happened. I'll have to figure all this out.
Yeah, the DMC, right.
Yeah, so you have, that's why they all have different things on the front, and Proto 1 is the first actual drivable prototype, which is when he brought in Bill Collins to do the engineering of making the car drivable. Okay.
And we had not designed the logo for DMZ. We only had the logo for JZD.
And CTC.
And that's what they put on the front.
Yeah. I actually wish I had pulled that out. I stored all of it after cataloging it, and I was like, gee, I should have brought some of the books and the stuff you gave me, but I forgot.
There was a fella by the name of Han. And I don't know his last name, but Hans was one of the first. He was involved in the first prototype. Hans.
Okay. Hans. And one other thing you told me that actually was really neat is that my dad talked to Malcolm every day when he was building his company.
He did. So... They were his closest friends were Roger Penske and Malcolm. Or in Bucky.
And Bunky.
Bucky was in walking distance of John's office. Because he was in the bank building across the street, Woodward and Long Lake, across from the agency, in the American Bank building.
So when we first met, you told me a story about my father's shirts.
Yep.
Could you tell the story about my father's shirts and the one that you told me?
Your father's shirts were made at a shirt maker on Washington Boulevard in Detroit. And they would come in boxes with the long collar and the beautiful knot, and his ties were impeccable. He had the greatest selection of ties that any human being on earth had. And I mean, they were just impeccable. And I always raved about how he dressed. And I raved about his shirts. So I had a shirt that I would keep at the office when I needed to put on a white shirt and a tie fast for something that was happening, because usually I was in jeans and a t-shirt. So, because I was going back and forth to the garage and, and doing a lot of different things. So John took my shirt and had somebody measure it and sent it to his shirt maker on Washington Boulevard, and he made me a box of the shirts.
Just to surprise you, that's the kind of guy my dad was. He was.
I had a gray one, I had a white one, and I had a blue one.
Oh, that's amazing.
And they were the most beautiful. Oh, they were just. And I remember, when he didn't wear cufflinks, he had 3 buttons.
Yeah.
Not 1 button, 3.
3, yeah. I wonder why. He was.
I don't know. It was just. It was the people that made it, and he liked that because it gripped the wrist nicely, and it could come out of the sport coat because he always had this much shirt showing because his coats were tailored so perfectly, and he had some of the greatest tweed gray sport coats and black sport coats. And of course, John being tall, he could wear clothes like that. He was a model. Besides being the greatest automobile mind that ever lived, he was a great model too.
So what was it
that
like?
Picture I sent you when he's sitting in the car, that was the day we broke the champagne on the hood.
Yeah. I have
and
to
you see how beautiful that sport coat was he had on.
Yeah, he was an impeccable dresser. What was it like to work for him?
Oh, it was just incredible. I mean, I worked for him when it was just the 2 of us. Then Colleen came on, and it was just, and I got to sit in his office at night and talk with him and have a glass of wine. And, we just, it was wonderful. And I did everything that was needed.
Yeah.
I could do anything. I graduated from the New York University of Photography, a 2-year course in 1 year. So he knew I could shoot anything, and my experience in the technical field when my brother and I were in business, and the printing end of it and the binding end of it all came into play, for what we were doing. And then just, the main thing he taught me was marketing and common sense. And, he'd always say, this isn't hard. You figure it out, and he was right. It wasn't, John had tremendous common sense, and he had engineering capabilities. He had design capabilities. He had marketing capabilities. And, when you go back to all the great automobile people, they either had this or that. They didn't have it all. Iacocca didn't have it all. None of the big GM guys didn't have it all. Bucky Knudsen didn't have it all. Ed Cole didn't have it. John was the only one. When John was in his prime, GM had 52% of the market.
Yeah.
He saved Pontiac. They were going bankrupt, and he built them up to the 3rd leading car manufacturer in the world.
He did that for Chevrolet too.
And he did that for Chevrolet. But who designs a car and then goes out to California and has a song written for it? Who does that?
My dad.
That's right.
I believe he was autistic, and I think his neurodivergent capabilities allowed him to see things that are extreme common sense, and then also have these out of the box thinking. I see it in my own child, and it kind of really makes a lot of sense. You had also told me that he was a closet artist.
Yeah, he sure was.
Because he just loved to draw a lot.
Oh, he loved it. I contracted with Lewis Art Supply. And I told them, I said, we can never be without these pads. I need a box always here. Because John would go through, and he just loved to, and I had to keep the right magic markers, the right pencils, the right sharpeners, everything, like a dentist's assistant, get all the stuff ready, when he's pulling teeth or doing a root canal. Well, I had to do that for John because John was meticulous and he wanted everything a certain way, and sometimes he would paint.
Oh, wow.
He would draw and then he would color.
Yeah.
But he would color with, and I had these, I found I don't remember the manufacturer, but they're little bottles and they were in 12 little bottles of all different colors.
Oh,
so he could take whatever color he wanted and brush. And then this was oil paints. So I had to have a can of lighter fluid there so he could clean the brush.
Wow. I didn't know he painted. That's incredible. Wow.
But he didn't paint a lot, but he painted when he drew things that he thought was really good. He wanted to put a color to it.
Wow.
And he didn't work with crayons. He worked with paint.
Wow. I see.
But then I had all the right magic markers for him, all the right pencils, all the right sharpeners, because he would have to sharpen these pencils a lot. And sometimes I brought him a carpenter's pencil one time because it had a thick lead.
Yeah.
And we sharpened it. And he says, this pencil's better than all of them because the lead doesn't break.
Yep.
He said, how did you? I said, I was in the hardware store and I saw these and I bought a dozen of them thinking maybe they would work. And they did.
That's really cool.
And those were thick pencils with thick lead, but you could sharpen them with an X-Acto knife.
Yes. Yeah.
And he would do that.
He was very particular. He wanted all very specific things, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, it was, it was like a dentist operating. Everything had to be right.
That's part of what I think that there's so many different things when I look back now that just point to him being autistic. The clothing he wore being weird, that's one of the things. His ability to see things that were just like common sense, but not to anybody but him.
Right.
And he ate the same food every single day, all the time. So, and these are all just. And then, like, I would watch him watch the same movie over and over and over again. All of these things where he just was just straight up autistic. I know. He just was that's the way he was. But that's the beauty of people who are on the spectrum is they can think differently. And I think my dad is one of the greatest examples. What's amazing about that is he made it so high in General Motors at a time when somebody like him really shouldn't have. So GM was really supportive and allowed him to even build some of their incredible programs like Operation Opportunity and things like that. What was his favorite lunch?
Tuna salad.
Really? I was going to say either tuna or a turkey club. One of those two.
Well, it all came from the Kingsley Inn. His lunch.
Yeah.
They would deliver it. Or we would go to the Kingsley Inn. He liked the Kingsley Inn much more than Fox and Hounds. Fox and Hounds was across the street. Kingsley Inn was on our side of Woodward. And he loved the Kingsley Inn.
He was a creature of habit.
In fact, I took your brother to the Kingsley Inn several Saturdays with my son when they were writing the book.
Wow. Was Zach with him a lot at work?
Zach would come on Saturdays.
Wow.
Spend the day. And I would bring John. And they were only a couple of years apart.
Oh.
So it worked out good.
I know what I have to ask you. Tell me about Christina cooking.
Oh, God. I made my lasagna for John, and taught her how to make lasagna.
And so,
because she couldn't cook.
Just can't.
And then several years after all this is over, my wife and I are sitting in our house in Rochester Hills in the kitchen, and I'll never forget it. We're looking at this little white TV that's about so big. And it was a morning show, and the guy came on. He said, "We have our guest today, Christine Farrar. She's bringing her cookbook that she just wrote." And I looked at Patty and I said, "Patty, she can't cook." I don't think she can boil water. And she wrote a cookbook. I gotta see it.
Okay, so well, thank you for teaching her, because she actually turned into a very good cook.
Yes,
I'm
she did. Yeah,
she did. She was very good cook growing up. So when you told me that, it was shocking and funny, and it was
there's a story that I don't think I told you, and maybe I did. Did I tell you the story of Ricky Nelson?
I don't think so. Maybe, but I don't know. I know my dad stayed friends with him my whole life. He even had Nelson, the two boys, the nephews, call me to wish me happy birthday, because I loved them when they had their
Gunther and his brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is the Ricky Nelson story. There's only about 7 of us at this time working for John. So John calls and says, "Have lunch brought in from the Kingsley Inn. I'm bringing someone in, and we're flying into the Pontiac Airport. We'll be there between 11:30 and 12." So we don't know who. We order lunch and his favorite stuff, and in comes with Ricky Nelson. And Ricky Nelson has his guitar over his shoulder, and he sings 3 songs for everybody in the office.
Wow. That's so cool. He was really good at, like, he just loved to make people happy. If he learned of something that would make you happy, he went out of his way.
At this time there was 4 men and 3 women. And I think Colleen and the other girl, Evelyn, I think her name was, they always begged him, could we meet Ricky Nelson sometime? He's just the most handsome kid we've ever seen in our life. And, and I think they said that several times to John. And then one day John said, "I'm bringing someone in." And of course it was Ricky Nelson.
Oh, that's amazing. Mark, you have
he was so handsome, just absolutely.
Do you remember the other person's name?
Do you remember the other person's name?
Yeah, do you remember the other person's name?
Which other?
You said the 2 girls in the office.
Colleen and...
No, I don't remember the other girls.
Diane?
It could have been.
Who's Diane, Mark?
Who's Diane? Diane is a woman I ran into on a cruise many years ago, who swore up and down that she worked for and knew John DeLorean very well. And when I started asking her questions, she clammed up and said, "I don't want to talk about it." That was the end of it.
Interesting. Yeah,
what year would that have been, Mark?
I met her in 2016.
Yeah. So that's okay. A lot of people claim that they knew my dad.
Well, if you met her in 2016, two of the girls were older than me, and one was my age.
Yeah.
So she would have been 75. Does that sound about right?
I mean, it's possible. She was an older woman, and
Okay.
she was traveling.
Right.
She was traveling with her husband on a cruise ship. I mean, she just saw me in a T-shirt, a DeLorean T-shirt, and we struck up a conversation. And I don't know, we talked for about 10, 15 minutes, and then when I started, asking specific questions about John and whatnot, she made some comment that I don't remember the exact comment, but the gist of it was that she didn't want to discuss it anymore. And we had a drink, and that was the end of that.
Interesting.
Wow.
That's interesting. That's
She didn't say anything about what she did or anything, did she?
She told me she was a secretary.
She could have been a secretary at GM too, part of the people who worked for him there.
Colleen came because Colleen worked for Penske.
Oh, wow. I really have to meet Colleen. Did she go to DCS, Mark?
Yeah, she's been to a couple DCSs.
Okay, I gotta meet this person. That's the person that Alex told me to get in touch with. J. Alex was Colleen. So, Colleen, if you see this, call me.
Colleen O'Neill.
So that's actually all the questions I have. We went through all of the ones. Mark, can you think of any that you have any questions?
The only question that really popped up about the car was, Richard, we're talking about the original 4-seater that was going to be built with Rolls-Royce. Was that car also a gull-wing design? Was it stainless steel?
No. I have a picture of it, Mark. I have the whole.
That the doors open this way, like the Rolls-Royce.
Suicide doors.
Yeah.
Suicide doors, yeah.
Right. Yeah. That had no features of the. It had all Rolls-Royce features.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of questions that the DeLorean community would be interested in as far as the car goes. I mean, I think
Right.
I think you guys have covered John pretty well, and I think the viewers are going to really like that.
The greatest thing about the DMZ and John's, design and what he wanted to do was when he bought the patents out to laminate stainless steel with plastic and how he did the underpart so it was so safe. That was the biggest feature of everything. Because if a car came and hit it sideways, it would bounce off of it.
I haven't actually talked about that publicly, Mark, because there's no public record that I can find of anybody doing this or even exploring it. So he had bought 3 different patents, and one of them was for the actual ERM process, but another was for a special composite that would allow you to leverage the ERM process and then add and then laminate it with stainless. So you would have an ultralight stainless steel car. And since nobody's figured this out yet, I think it's still, he bought the 3 patents and the 3 patents still belong to other people now. But what is possible is to actually take the idea that he had and use it for a stainless skin. So this is a potential that we could actually use to create a very, very lightweight stainless steel car. So I haven't been publicly talking about that yet, Richard, because nobody else has figured out that that's what he was actually going to do. Right. They thought it was going to be a plastic car like I did. So
and those patents were in his name.
Yeah, they actually belong to somebody else now. He used it because as soon as you told me that, I went looking into it. And in his bankruptcy filing, he actually talks about what happened to those patents and how the person who now owned them was making $50 million a year back in 2005. So he was like, we were right. But so the ERM process still exists. Somebody's doing it, but nobody put the 2 pieces together where he actually laminated the stainless to it. Nobody knows that was even a thing that was going to happen, or Elon Musk would have figured it out and done it for his stupid Cybertruck.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. Right.
which
But
is
he the patents were not in composite technology. It was in John Z. DeLorean's name.
yeah,
All
that's
three of them.
that's kind of what happened to, they were actually all in the trust, so Christina had something to do with it. It's a terrible story, but that was a whole fun thing that I learned about whatever. Anyway, I actually need to go now because I have had to use the restroom for about half of this call.
All right. Well, listen, it's been wonderful.
But I want to end it properly because I'm going to cut this section out. We don't need everybody to know I'm ending the call because I have to pee.
I have a quick question for Richard, for personal question.
Yes.
Did you I see you have a Corvette shirt. I assumed you were involved with the Corvette. Did you work on the Cadillac XLR?
No.
Okay.
I had the first 100-mile-an-hour Corvette in the country at Detroit Dragway in 1959.
That's amazing. Oh my God.
John loved that. And the picture is right here on my, but you can't see it. But anyways, this is the,
What's the fastest you've ever gone, Richard?
well, with a stock engine in 59, I turned 100.33. The same night that Don Gartlett set the world record, 187 and a quarter mile with Swamp Rat 2.
Wow. I've been 157 in a car and on a bike. So
Yeah, I've been my 215 Corvette at the airport, I had it at about 130.
wow.
And it was just cruising. You know, it's mine is the last front engine.
Yeah, I have a 2016 Z06 and
Yeah. Right.
you will pry that car from Mike. I will die in that car.
Yep.
So I love it. As a matter of fact, when you told the story about my dad listening to them start it up, just 2 days ago, Jason was moving the car and I was working and I stopped just to listen to the car rumbling outside because it's like, I love driving it with the windows down just so I could hear the roar of the engine. Oh, it's incredible. And having it right behind my head with like, oh my gosh, it's just incredible. So
well, we can say absolutely positively that the car, the seeds were planted in the car in the 60s when John was at the tech center.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
Because every day he looked out at those stainless steel bodies. He knew what he was going to do.
I drove I love that. I love that the DMC was born of a Corvette. I drove one of the new C8s for my birthday last year, and it's a great car. Don't get me wrong, because I'm about to try to say something bad about it, but I didn't like driving it as much because it was so stuck to the road, and I'm so used to front engine tail happy cars that I missed the excitement of it not handling perfectly. it was too perfect. There was just something missing from the car, because now that's unfair to that year, to the C7 Corvette, because that car actually had the weight distribution that they accomplished with a front engine car on that car is unbelievable. But no matter what I did, I broke loose everywhere all the time because it's just tail happy. And I missed that in the C8. It wasn't as tail happy. Right. It wasn't in the 06, but it still wasn't the same. So I've learned that I love to have front engine cars that go really fast because they're squirrely.
Yeah. Exactly.
Anyway, Richard, this was wonderful.
Right,
Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll talk again, of course. And Mark, thank you for joining us to help be my
Mark,
support
very
person.
nice meeting you, and thank you very much.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
Okay, anytime you have any questions, don't hesitate to call.
Oh,
a lot of things I remember that I don't remember,
Yes,
So,
I will have more, I'm sure. So let me
okay.
close this out and I'll end the recording and then I'll end the call. So thank you everyone for joining us. I've really enjoyed getting to know Richard with you. Please do join us again when we interview somebody else that is from my father's life. Well, we get to know who the man John DeLorean is as we go on the journey of finding my father. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all next time.